Amiga, do you ever feel caught between two worlds? You cherish your cultural background, but sometimes it clashes with the realities of raising a family in modern America. You might feel pressured to fulfill traditional expectations, yet you crave a life that allows you to be your true, authentic self. If you're a Latina mom nodding your head right now, I see you and I get it. Balanced Motherhood is more than your average mommy coaching program. It's a supportive comunidad designed specifically for you. I understand the unique challenges you face navigating between generations and culturas while forging your own path as a mama. Stop feeling like you have to choose between your roots and your future. Balanced Motherhood empowers you to create a life that celebrates your heritage, embraces your motherhood journey, and prioritizes your own happiness. Spots are limited. Don't miss out on this opportunity to connect with a supportive community and create a more balanced life. Visit the link in the show notes to join the waitlist for the next Balanced Motherhood cohort. I can't wait to meet you. Hola, hola, amiga. In today's episode, I am so excited to have Ana Lopez rejoin us again, bringing her invaluable insights and fresh updates since her last appearance in episode 19. Ana is a proud Latina, a distinguished sexologist, certified sex and life coach, and a keen smut consultant. Drawing from her rich background in therapy and coaching, she dedicates her life to sexuality, liberating women, especially within the Latina community, by challenging the sex-negative narratives that overshadow our natural desire for pleasure. Through her business, Sex and Spanglish, Ana aims to provide culturally relevant sex education that not only addresses the individual's needs and values, but also encourages open discussions about sex, much like our favorite chismes. In this conversation, we explore the complex journey new parents undergo to reconnect sexually after welcoming a baby. We cover everything from emotional and physical transformations to the significance of understanding one's body anew. Ana offers her expertise on navigating these challenges. She shares groundbreaking advice on preparing for postpartum sex, dealing with body image issues, and the importance of open communication with partners. Be prepared to be enlightened as we break down barriers and address questions you may have been too shy to ask. We're going to dive into this must-hear conversation on rekindling intimacy, and hopefully you feel empowered about your own sex life so that you can bring back your own desires and pleasures. Mama, it is about time, and it's so important that this journey is not only physical, but an emotional one as well. So here is my conversation with Ana Lopez from Sex in Spanglish. Welcome to the Viva la Mami podcast. I am your host, Jessica Cuevas. I am a mother of two on a mission to help redefine the meaning of motherhood as a modern Latina mom. Motherhood can be a complex journey, interwoven in two identities that often make us feel ni de aquí ni de allá. Viva la Mami is committed to providing you with knowledge, tools, and support to navigate the challenges and triumphs of motherhood as Latina moms. On the show, we'll be discussing culturally relevant topics that will help inform and empower you in whichever season you are in on your motherhood journey. We'll be joined by Latina moms, experts and professionals who can offer advice, practical tips, relatable stories, and honest conversations. So bring your cafecito as I invite you to be a part of this space as we create comunidad about the exciting and challenging parts of being a mommy. Ahora, vámonos. Hola, hola, Ana. Welcome back. How are you?
Thanks. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Thanks so much for being here again. You were with us back in episode 19, and we kind of talked in general about how to bring your sex life back. But I think this is a very important topic as we delve deep on how to rebuild and rekindle really your sex life after having a baby. I think many new moms specifically struggle with this because they go through so many emotional, physical changes during the postpartum period. And one of the most important aspects of this is kind of like rebuilding that connection and intimacy back with your partner. And and yeah, so thank you so much for being here. Can you kind of tell us any updates about you since our past episode to our listeners?
Yeah, definitely. So, I started my dissertation. I think actually the last time we talked, I had like just started. So now I'm in like I guess the second semester. And so my focus, I've kind of like solidified that focus. It's always been about like Latino women and sex, but really the question that I will be asking in terms of my research question is what does it mean to be Latina and also a sexual being? And the process is going to look like interviewing Latinas all over the states. So I'm super excited about that. So maybe I'll be interviewing some of your listeners. That's super exciting. What else? Oh, I'm also doing consulting now. So I'm working with authors who write sex scenes to help them write better sex scenes that aren't boring, right? So oftentimes when we think of like it's politically correct or whatever, it can be very boring, but I don't think that it has to be. And because writers are creatives, I think they just need like my expertise with their creation or their creative side is really fun to do.
That is awesome. And I'm assuming that for the most part, these like, like books or what have you are more so like white centric, right? Like,
A lot of them are, yeah. There are, like, up and coming, like, more diverse, like, authors and people writing more diverse, which is super exciting to see. So now I'm just trying to get it
yeah.
to be more sex positive, which is where I come in.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, that is exciting. Congrats on
Mm,
that. That is really helpful to definitely give a different perspective for sure.
yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, let's talk about the reality really when a lot of parents go through really like everything changes, and especially when you have a baby, like, nothing will be the same.
No.
Everything changes. Even the household, that you once created, it's all going to change, and structures and all of that. So, how can new parents really expect these changes, especially when it comes to their intimacy?
Yeah, so I love that you said, like, how can they expect these changes? And I think, like, that's part of the answer, right? Is, like, expecting it to happen.
Mhm.
Because what I see oftentimes happening is, like, someone is pregnant and they're just like, "Oh, yeah, like, we're gonna be like, we're pregnant and we're gonna have a baby and all this," and that's great, right? But we don't think about, like, what is life gonna be like after the baby comes, right? Like, our entire world changes essentially. And a lot of people, a lot of parents don't think about that. I
Mm.
What I notice is that people are very like baby centered, which makes sense, right? Like you're bringing a baby into the world that like needs to be fed and bathed and all of that, but we almost, like, forget that, like, that has an impact on our household, like you mentioned, right? It has an impact on our relationship. It has an impact even on our relationships with ourselves, right? Because there's, like, less time and things like that, and so really just expecting that to happen rather than assuming that you're gonna bring a baby home and everything's gonna be like it was, like, 10 months ago, right? So that expectation piece, I also have, like I think it's a really, like, unique, I guess, view on this, is that I think that new parents go through a grieving period, and I know that sounds really weird because, like, we're like, "Oh, we're bringing a baby into this world and everything's exciting," right? And we're just like, "Oh, it's like, I don't know, flores everywhere, whatever," right? But we we don't allow, like, as and I when I say we, I say, like, as a society, like, we don't talk about, like, this grief period, right? Like, the relationship that you once had, especially for like first time parents, if there was like no children in the home and now you have a baby, right? Like your relationship dynamic changes. The household dynamic changes, right? Like the ability, maybe you really like to go out to like concerts or shows or go on trips or whatever. And like, not to say that you can't, but there's change. And anytime there is big change, there is a grief period. And I think that we often focus on grief as just like, oh, someone died. But like your previous life kind of died, right? Not that you can't bring some of those things back into this new, like this quote unquote new life, but like it's never going to be the same again in the same way that a mother's body is not going to be the same again, right? Even if you didn't bring a baby home for whatever reason, right? Maybe you had a miscarriage, maybe you had an abortion, like whatever, your body still changed, and so allowing yourself to grieve that body, I think we might have touched on that in the last episode as well, right?
Mhm.
Allowing yourself to, like, grieve that body because your body changed and what you're learning your body almost all over again because it looks different. I have a friend that
Mhm.
he's I wanna say he's, like, a little over 1 now, and she was like, "I feel like I'm learning to walk again." She was like, "I don't walk the same anymore, and I'm trying to figure out how to walk in a way that's normal for me." And so even those really, like,
Mhm.
nuanced things, just allowing yourself to, like, yes, be excited. You brought a baby home, and also there's a grieving period that needs to happen.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I think we definitely need to normalize that it is okay to grieve our past life. And oftentimes we struggle with that. It's like all of a sudden you have to be on mom mode 100%. And yes, great, but it's almost like you're kind of ignoring your past life, right? Like, and I think that with all of these changes and transitions, a lot of people struggle with that, especially in the identity piece, because they feel like they should kind of start anew. And it's like, no, you can always bring back your past life with your new life, or you can always look back and, just like grieve it. And it is okay. So thank you for normalizing that because it is very important, especially coming from you who works with so many people on how they can, be sexual beings and bring back their sex lives, right? And so, what do you think are the main kind of like 3 to 4 reasons based on your clients and people that you work with? What are some of the reasons why a partner may not want to have sex after baby?
Yeah, oh my gosh, so many reasons, like, flooded into my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the most common one that I would see, or that I do see, is that they are, like, having issues in terms of, like, their body, right? So this happens in, like, I almost feel like these are, like, 2 different reasons. So one is, like, a body image, right? It's, like, not really fully embracing the body that you now have, and I think that we kinda touched on that in the last episode as well, right? Of, like, grieving your old body, learning to love your new body, getting familiar with it, and the reality is it's just different, and so, again, we go into this expecting to be like everything's gonna be the same, but, like, that's actually not how that works. Even if you get to, like, pre-baby weight or whatever, like, your body is not the same. And so really it's a process of, like, learning your body again, just like you're learning your baby and your baby's moods and your baby's cries and, like, all of that. Like, you need to relearn your body as well. And so that's a part of
Mhm.
it. The other part I think is really just, like, the healing process. I notice a lot of women that give birth do not prepare ahead of time. So they prepare ahead of time for, like, everything baby, but there's little to no preparation done for, like, you, right? Like, you are also healing. And so getting those support systems in place, if that's available to you, right? Figuring out what is it that you might need and having those things on hand and ready, like having a plan for yourself to support you in the healing process. Because what happens is women get home from the hospital or, wherever the birthing center, wherever, and they're like, oh, I actually, like, need help, and not just help with the baby, like, I need help caring for myself, and then you have to use, like, your brain that is also now, like, brain fog, new mom brain, you try to find solutions to problems. And it's like, let's use your brain when it's like hasn't just gone into labor, right? Really planning that ahead of time. And I know that may not sound helpful for people that are like, well, I already had the baby, so now what? But really just use AI if you want, right? Or Google something. And it may be things that you sound really like weird, but it could even just be like, I don't know, having water bottles at the side of your bed or, having ice packs ready in the freezer or whatever it is. And it's really just about like having that plan. I feel like I'm giving solutions. You asked for problems, but um, let's see. What else do I see? A lot of over touching is another thing. So
Mhm.
especially for breastfeeding moms, like feeling overtouched, overstimulated. So I feel like those are the same thing and not at the same time. So sometimes it's overstimulation in terms of like noise and stuff like that. And for some people, it's overstimulation in terms of touch. So I would say those are like the
Mhm.
three most common.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to, those reasons, why you wouldn't wanna have sex after a baby. Like, your body is going through so many changes, and also, like, your emotions, your mindset is not fully there, and I actually ask my listeners, on Instagram about what were some of the reasons why you didn't wanna have sex after baby, and many said that it was because baby was a priority, but also they were afraid that they were going to experience pain. And I thought that was interesting, with that. And that was my perspective too. Although the majority of my listeners said that they had sex within the clearance, whether if it was a six
Mhm.
week or 8 week clearance mark, um, which is interesting because we have these assumptions that it's going to be painful, but then again, we do it after the 6 week recovery
Yeah.
period. Yeah, which was my case, right? It's like your doctor says after 6 weeks, like, go ahead, you can do it. And then I did, and I was like, no, this isn't, no. Yeah, for me, I did experience pain. And
Hmm.
I thought that I was never gonna have sex because I thought that this was the new normal, and then it wasn't until I spoke up, and that's when I was recommended to go to physical therapy. And if it wasn't for me, like, advocating for myself, I probably would have had painful sex for a long, long time, and this was before my second baby was born. So, when I was pregnant the second time around, I went to PT, I saw a pelvic floor specialist, and that way to prepare my body. And even after, during the postpartum period, I also went, through physical therapy as well, but oftentimes in our culture, I feel like we don't talk about these things. De
Hmm.
por sí, sex is already taboo, and we already don't talk about our bodies. And it's interesting, many women that I know, at least in my family, they see that peeing is normal after having a baby. Painful sex, especially, is normal. And I just often wonder, and I don't know if you want to give me your 2 cents about this, but considering these reasons, right? Like, do you think that that can impact your relationship with your partner and overall your sex life and satisfaction?
Yeah, I think it definitely can, particularly like, I mean, depending on like the pain level and pain tolerance, like you may just end up avoiding sex. And for some people, they're like, yeah, I just avoid it because it's painful. So I'm just kind of turned off by it. But I think a lot of times it ends up happening like subconsciously, like your libido or your desire just kind of starts like tapering off because your brain is
Mhm.
and your body is trying to get you to avoid something that is painful, right? The purpose of your brain is really just to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And it's like, oh, if this thing is painful, well, let's just like not produce hormones that are going to get you to want to have sex. So you just avoid sex, right? And so it's like your brain is trying to help you, but then you're like, "Oh, well, now I don't wanna have sex," and a lot of women are left wondering why, and that could be partially why, and I wanna, like, reiterate this, I probably said it 5,000,000 times in the last episode as well, but, like, sex should not be painful, ever. Like, that is not that is an indication that something is wrong, and unfortunately, I can't just, like, give a one answer of what that could be, but I'm so glad that you were able to go and see a pelvic floor therapist. I recommend that for everyone, mom or not, like where you
Mhm.
are, like in terms of like postpartum, even going while you're pregnant, right? It can really help with the labor process. And even if Like, you never wanna have sex again, you never wanna have a baby again, pelvic floor health is super important. If you don't wanna be peeing your pants when you're, like, 70 years old, like, you need to go see a pelvic floor therapist.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. I think it's definitely important. And when it comes to like the overstimulation and just like going through all of these emotional, like really an emotional roller coaster, based on your experience, what is kind of like your recommendations when a woman really wants to, a new mom wants to, but for some reason, all of these factors are coming in and they don't end up having sex, with their partner?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say once you realize like, "Oh, I'm not wanting to have sex, but, like, I want to have sex, like, I want to have sex," right? That
Yeah.
is when you should seek professional support, whether that means, going
Mm,
to a therapist, whether that means, like, going to a sex coach, him to me, right? Like, whatever that means. But oftentimes I see women, and I even see this in like people that don't have children, right? They wait so long and they're just like, oh, well, I couldn't find a solution. When in reality, they weren't really looking. They were just kind of Googling maybe things that I can buy or like different positions that I can try and things like that. And it's like,
mm.
if you had, like, let's say, some type of like illness in your body, right? And actually, I think we also do this, is we're like, "Well, what do I have? Maybe it's allergies, maybe it's a cold," and we try to, like, figure it out instead of just going to the doctor and being like, "Hey, these things are happening, it's been going on for a month, and I don't know what's going on," and getting, like, professional help because we can identify your problem so much sooner than you can. I would say probably 9 times out of 10, my clients come to me telling me that their problem is one thing and it's something entirely different. And they're like, "Oh, well, why didn't I think of that before?" I'm like, "Because this isn't your expertise." And so I would say, if you notice that there's a problem, seek support, right? And if you're not sure,
Mm.
like, what type of support that you need, like, feel free to DM me because sometimes it means coming to a sex coach or, like, a sex therapist. Sometimes that means, like, going to the doctor, or sometimes it's just a matter of, like, drinking more water or something, right? Like, depending on what your problem is, but I'm happy to
Yeah.
send people in the right direction because I think that's very confusing and overwhelming as well. It's like I have this issue, but like who do I see? There's a million people that I can see. And it can cost a lot of money if you're continually trying to go and damage, right? Like trying to go to places that aren't necessarily solving your problem. But I'm more than happy to help people figure out like what that could look like.
Yeah, thanks for offering that. I think it's very important, especially within our cultura too, right? Like I said, and I always say this, that por si we don't talk about our bodies,
Yeah.
sex is so taboo, like it's literally behind closed doors and you gotta solve it and fix it on your own. And it's like, well, how do people really learn about like different positions? Like I guess Google can help and stuff, but yeah, it makes me wonder, like, if we don't talk about our bodies or we didn't grow up about literally having the sex talk, right? Like I had a super G-rated version of it, it was mostly because to prevent pregnancy. That was the
Mhm.
whole reason why,
Right.
why I had the talk. And so yeah, like considering our society and our culture as Latinas, how do we kind of put ourselves in this sort of liberation, if you will, about our desire, considering that we grew up not really understanding what we would desire, as adults or, once we are sexual beings, right? And how does that really impact once you go through this postpartum period?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it starts by recognizing, and it's going to sound easier than it is in actual application, but it's really just acknowledging that like you have desire in the first place. I think what stops a lot of people is like they have low libido, right? So they have like no like physical desire to have sex, but they have like a mental desire, right? So they're like, I want to have sex, but I'm just like not feeling it. But then, so they acknowledge that, right? Or they think it like in their head, and then the shame comes in, right? It's like, "Oh my gosh, I want sex. What does that mean
Mm,
about it? What does that mean about me?" Like, que vergüenza, like all of this stuff, right? And it's really like, that is normal. Like, it is normal to want to have sex. And so just reminding yourself of that, of like, this is normal. For some people, like, that thought is very helpful. For some people, they're like, "But what if it's not?" And then they get in an argument with their brain. So you can even just ask yourself the question, like, "But what if this is normal?" If you logically know, like, "Oh, this is normal, but I was told otherwise," right? It can really bring in, like, a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? You're like, "Well, I believe this one thing, but, like, I heard this other thing my whole life," right? I heard it was wrong. I heard it was dirty or bad or whatever my whole life, but I actually don't believe that. Really just giving like, asking yourself a powerful question such as like, "Well, what if it is normal? But what if this is okay?" Or whatever that looks like can really be powerful. You don't even have to answer it. Just pose the question and just leave it at that. And eventually, your
Mhm.
brain is gonna start answering that question because our brain loves to solve problems. So really asking powerful
Mhm.
questions, I call them leading questions, right? Questions that are posed in a way that are gonna get you the answer that you want. So if you want to believe that this is normal and that, like, nothing is wrong with you, which is often the thought that my clients have, like, there's something wrong with me. But, like, when your brain offers you these thoughts that are creating shame around you or, like, guilt or, like, you're gonna get in trouble or whatever it is, like, "Well, what if nothing's wrong with me?
Mhm.
Well, what if this isn't a problem?" It can be really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, that is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think our brain is so powerful and we get to dictate it, right?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, because I think we often let our brain run the show when, like, sure, it's running
Mm,
all like if I wanna move my arm and, whatever, but, like, in terms of thinking, like, you get to tell your brain what to think. It's like a computer, but we don't utilize that to
mm.
our advantage.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective. I never thought of that really. And when we add in our culture too, it's like all this like Catholic guilt comes into play
Mhm.
or like things that you never talk about and it's like, well, why am I having these thoughts, right? And so I'm glad that you mentioned about like normalizing this sort of mindset and training our brain into seeing what is possible out there. And
Yeah.
so now, if though, like if a new mom was going through this mindset shift of like, okay, I went through the literally the first 6 weeks or 3 months, whatever it is, whenever she is ready. And now it is time to perhaps talk about this with your partner. In terms of bringing in your partner into play, if you are in a partnered relationship after you're having a baby, how do you really bring up this? Like, and oftentimes as women, we weren't taught to like be the initiators, I guess,
Mhm.
you just assume that the dude, assuming that, if you are in a heterosexual relationship, like the dude would bring it, on and he would initiate. What is your best advice in terms of how women can initiate to their partner?
Yeah, definitely. So normally in another world, I would or any other scenario, I would say just to like initiate in a way that feels comfortable for you. However,
Mhm.
because it is quite possible that you may want to stop mid session, that it might be painful. Like you don't know if this is the very first time that you're having sex after the baby, particularly if you've never had a baby before, right? You're not sure what to expect. So I would highly encourage having a conversation. And so I always recommend having these types of conversations outside of the bedroom, fully clothed. You can even go, I don't know, have it at Starbucks. I don't care. But it can be really helpful to get away from, like, where you normally have sex, which is, like, typically the bedroom, but, like, being out of that space, right? So it would be like, I don't know, we wake up on a Saturday morning, go for a walk, like, let's talk about this. Before you actually have the conversation, though, you need to get really clear on what it is that you wanna share with your partner. A lot of times people go into
Mhm.
conversations like, "Well, I wanna talk about this thing," but they're not really clear about their thoughts, and that's how the conversation kind of gets, like, all jumbled up, and you feel like you never really got to, like, a resolution or it didn't really go anywhere. A lot of times people talk about it going, like, in circles, but it's typically because the initiator of the conversation wasn't really clear on what they were thinking, right? And so getting really
Mhm.
clear with yourself first, like, what is it that I'm thinking? What am I feeling? Do I have any worries or concerns? What are my desires, right? And really putting that all out on the table. I know as vulnerable as that might seem, but like that is going to give you the best case scenario. So once you've done that,
Mm.
once you've figured all of that out in your own mind, asking for consent to have the conversation. And I know this sounds really weird, but if your partner comes home from a long day at work, like the last thing they want to do is have this conversation, even if it is about sex, right? You want to get someone that's in their right mindset, right? You don't want to talk to your partner when they're like halfway falling asleep on the couch, right? Like that's not helpful. So saying like, "Hey, I'd really like to talk to you about like when we're gonna have sex and like is now a good time?" If they say yes, great. Have a conversation and share all of that information that you got, like that you downloaded from your own brain. If they say no,
Mm.
then schedule a date and time to have the conversation. I know that sounds really weird, but what it does is it gives you and your partner's brain like time to prepare. Not that you're going to be like taking notes
Mm.
and, comparing in the conversation, but it really just reduces that kind of anxiety of like, okay, it's like the expectation thing again, right? It's like, okay, Tuesday when the kids go to bed, we're gonna have this conversation on the couch with a cup of tea or whatever the hell you do, right? Like, it's really just it really reduces that anxiety because you know what's gonna happen. In the same way that you tell your kids, like, "Okay, we're gonna get ready, we're gonna go to grandma's house, and then afterwards, we're gonna go to the store, but we're only getting dinner. We're not grabbing anything else, we're not grabbing any toys, and then we're gonna go home," right? It's really just like it's providing that expectation and that certainty for your brain that it desires, and it really brings down that anxiety
Mm.
that you're probably already feeling because 'cause you're gonna be having this super vulnerable conversation.
Yes. It's so interesting how there's strategy involved in this, right? There's like there's specific strategies on like how to prepare your brain, to know what you're going to say and then preparing your partner and setting those kind of expectations. And I just hate our culture here because you see this on TV, right? It's like, bam, they're getting into action. And
Yeah.
like you just assume that that is the expectation without even talking,
Mhm.
And it's so frustrating because the same way as when you're preparing your kids to get out the house, you should also like bring this up with your partner as well to prepare yourself for the next step in whatever desire you have or whatever it is, right? Whenever you're ready to have sex, especially after baby. And so communication is definitely important and I thank you so much for sharing that because yeah, oftentimes we just assume that oh he's ready, like but you never know, like a lot of times, especially dads, fathers, like they're also going through a postpartum period, whether if it's postpartum depression, many men go through that, or they're not in the right mindset because they're probably worried about whatever reasons there are, especially when you welcome a child. And so yeah, as women especially, we shouldn't just assume that the man's going to want it. Like we should definitely set those expectations and have that open communication for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
definitely.
so
I
thank
always
you for sharing that.
Of course, yeah. So I always say, like, you don't have to have these conversations if you don't want to. Like, you literally don't have to do anything. You could just like be like, okay, well, I'm gonna initiate, or I'm gonna kind of hint to him, or like whatever. Like, you could do that if you want, but it's probably not going to be as effective. So like, and then you have to do the hard work of like dealing with all the emotions and stuff that happens after that. So like, which hard do you want? Do you want the hard of where like I'm gonna try to do the thing not knowing all the information, and then potentially facing rejection on all of these other emotions, in addition to all this postpartum, like, hormonal stuff that might be going on, right? Or do you wanna deal with the heart of, like, figuring out what it is that's actually, like, going on in your brain and body, and then, like, sharing that with your partner? Like, which heart do you want?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps to shift it a little bit differently, and I like how you provided both ways just to kind of really think about, the impact, especially in your relationship. Yeah. And so considering, that we're specifically talking about the postpartum period and just the madness that happens, sleepless nights, everyone is sleep deprived, body is changing, hormones are all over the place. And again, assuming that you are ready to have sex, how do you though set the time to like do it? despite all the madness that motherhood can bring. And this, I guess, this isn't really specific to postpartum. It's like momming all the time,
Yeah.
right? And how do you really set the time? And yeah, and talk to your partner about this.
Yeah, totally. So, y'all are gonna hate me for this, but, like, scheduled sex, and I know that sounds so unsexy, like, when it's supposed to, the movies tell us it's supposed to be spontaneous, like, this, that, and the other.
Mm,
But again, if you are not doing it, like I always tell my clients that are like anti-scheduling, like you don't have to schedule it, but that means that it's going to continue being the same way that it has been, right? You have enough things on your plate as a mom, especially like some of y'all work, right? Your partner works, right? There's a lot going on. And that is probably not the first thing on your mind as it was when you first started dating your husband or whoever, right? Like, it's not the first thing on your mind. So in order to make sure that it gets done, it has to get on the calendar. In the same way, you're like, "Oh, my kid has a doctor's appointment at 8 AM, and then at 10 PM, like, my other kid has an appointment," or, like, whatever, right? Like, it's really about, like, putting it on the calendar, and not only does that ensure that you're going to have it, it also, like, prepares your brain and your body again of like, okay, Tuesday at 5 PM. I don't know why I always use that day and time, but Tuesday at 5 PM, like we're we're gonna have sex or we're gonna attempt to have sex, right? And it really just helps reduce that anxiety. It really helps to prepare your mind and body. Oftentimes, people that schedule sex actually need less foreplay. Not that you can't get more if you don't want it, like that is an option, but it it already allows you to go into the session. You're already kind of like semi warmed up because you know that you're going to be having sex. Now, you can say Tuesday at 5 PM, we're gonna have sex, and then your kid gets sick or what something happens, like life happens. So expecting that to happen, but not there's a difference between like emergencies. So like your kid getting sick, someone else in the family like needs you and whatever, right? There's a difference between that and just being like, oh, well, we're tired, or like using some other excuse. So really be honest with
mm,
yourself about like, okay, if this was a doctor's appointment for my child, like would I be canceling it or would would I actually go independent if I'm tired or like something else was going on? So really treating it like, no, this is a true appointment that we are going to do our best to make. But if like something happens and that's okay. And really being on to yourself of like, okay, we've scheduled it for like 4 times this month and we've only had it once. What happened and getting really clear. Maybe it was just like a really shitty month and everybody was getting sick and, things were happening and that's okay, but really being honest with yourself. Were you just kind of like forgetting about
mm,
it because you had to skip it once because your kid was sick and then you just kind of forgot about it? And really just getting clear on that
mm,
and really prioritizing like, okay, no, this is an important part of a life. Most times people don't have sex because they're not prioritizing it. It's just like, "Oh, what'll happen when it happens,"
yeah.
kind of thing, or when you think about it. But we got other things to be thinking about. We can't think about sex all day. Like, not everybody has my career. Like, we can think about sex all day, right? And even as a sex coach, I will schedule sex sometimes. It doesn't look like, "Hey, I'm gonna send you a calendar invite," but I'll text my partner and be like, "Hey, on Saturday, like, I can sleep in, so, like, let's have sex in the morning," right? Like, it can be as simple as
Mm. Yeah, that was kinda like my follow-up questions about, like, what happens if, like, your mindset isn't there?
Mhm.
And especially as moms, we carry on this, like, invisible labor, right? The mental load specifically. And I asked my listeners if the invisible load really impacts your sex drive, and it does. The
Mhm.
majority of them said that it does. And considering all this, we talked about, like, how communication is key and everything. And sometimes I feel like with the mental load and everything, I think it's because of the invisible labor that we often do. Our brains are just like constantly moving about, are the dishes clean?
Mhm.
Is the doctor appointment set for this child? Did I make a grocery list? Like all of these things are in our heads and constantly running. And assuming that we have scheduled, sex, but then again, you're not fully in that full mindset, to to be ready. What are some kind of strategies that you recommend when bringing this up to your partner?
Yeah, definitely. So if if it's about the mental load, right? It can really just be as simple as asking for help. Like, "Hey, can you wash the dishes? Can you do this thing?" Right? Particularly on the day that you so if this coming Tuesday at 5, you're gonna have sex, be like, "Hey, we have sex on the calendar. Like, we're supposed to have it at 5. Like, can we I don't know, can you pick up takeout on your way home?" Right? So that there's no dishes. Can you wash the dishes? Right? Um, we talked about overstimulation. Can you take the kids for a few minutes? Like, can you do bedtime today so that I can get a break?
Mhm.
Maybe go outside, do a meditation, whatever feels take a walk, I don't know, right? So that I can then like decompress before going into the bedroom. And then in terms of like
Mm.
while you're in the moment is really just practicing something that I call active meditation. So oftentimes people will tell me, especially women will tell me, I can't turn off my mind in the bedroom. Well, you're not supposed to turn off your mind. That would be not helpful if you did because you would probably be dead, right? Like your mind is always working even when you're sleeping. And so active meditation is essentially just focusing on the senses, right? So sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. And so it's really just focusing on what is in front of you, what is happening around you. It brings you into the present moment. So you're not thinking about your to do list. So you're not thinking about, like, oh, shoot, like, did I read the kids a bedtime story? Like, I forgot, right? Like, thinking about all of those things. It's really just like, okay, what can I feel right now? Maybe my partner's like massaging me or careciéndome, right? Like, what do I see, right? Maybe I see my partner's face in front of me. And I know it sounds really silly, but doing this actually heightens the sensations that you feel, which then allow you to
Mm.
relax even more. It also takes your body out of the fight or flight response that we often experience, probably like on a regular basis, right? It really takes us out because it's like, oh, there is no danger here. And allowing yourself to really
Mm.
be in the moment. And that isn't to say that when you do this, your mind isn't going to wander, especially if you're not really well versed in this, but you can always bring it back. And it's not a problem that your mind wanders. Your mind is supposed to wander. I think a huge misconception with like typical or traditional meditation is like, oh, I'm supposed to turn off my mind for like 5 minutes at a time. So I can't do meditation, but it's called practice for
Mm.
a reason. It's really just having longer moments where you're focused on the breath and kind of quieting the mind, not turning it off, quieting it. Your mind is gonna wander, and then you just bring it back, and it's not gonna look the same every time. Sometimes you're gonna be like, "Oh, I'm so focused on this," and sometimes your brain's, like, off in the clouds somewhere, and neither one is right or wrong, good or bad, and it's really about deciding ahead of time that no matter what happens, you're gonna try, and you're not gonna be mean to yourself about it afterwards.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I know that for many of us, like we can just let go, right? And I think it's also important to let go. Like the dishes will get done eventually
Mhm.
and or delegate or, have you and your partner be accountable for what you sign up for, and that is being parents, right? And I think that oftentimes we feel like we need to do everything, especially as Latinas, right? We have to be these super mamas that we have to do it all. And I think it's definitely important if, we want to prioritize ourselves because we are sexual beings, we should prioritize this aspect of our lives. Might as well talk with our partner, but also let things go too. And I know that it is very hard, but I think at the end of the day, we also need to satisfy our bodies and our well-being overall instead of just prioritizing on this to-do list that is constantly running through our heads. And so I really appreciate you sharing that meditation piece.
I will say
Yeah. Yeah.
even do this when you're playing with your kids. Like, I have a bunch of clients that are like, "Well, I go to the park with my kid and I'm, like, focused on them, like, I'm looking at them, but my mind is, like, elsewhere." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, so pay attention, like, what are they doing?" Pay attention to a specific, I don't know, strand of hair on their head or, like, a specific movement that they're doing, right? What do you hear? Do you hear, like, are you at the park? Maybe you hear other kids, maybe you hear traffic, I don't know. But, like, you can use this practice anywhere, and what that does is it really helps reduce that mental, like, brain fog that we often feel. So mental brain fog happens because we are doing a lot of the time, and it also happens because we're doing something and thinking about a million other things at once. So it's the equivalent of having like 20 tabs open on your computer, as I have like 5 and it's like 10 a.m., right? Like it's the equivalent of having a lot of tabs open. So your computer is running slower, right? Whereas when we are in the moment, time passes seemingly passes by a lot slower, and we feel a lot calmer because our brain isn't like, "Oh, we're in danger." And it also reduces, like, that mental fatigue that we often feel.
Mm. I love how you can apply it every day in everyday life, really. And I think it's definitely important to just like being present. And I know that we all struggle as mamas. And I often hear this from my listeners about like, just not being able to focus or not being able to fully being present with bebe or even with your partner. And I think practicing that active meditation, I think that would be very helpful to practice on your everyday life. You shared some really great tips here. But what would your best tip or advice be to give like mama who is kind of struggling right now during her postpartum period and she wants to kind of rebuild her intimacy with her partner?
Yeah. So y'all probably gonna laugh at this. It's gonna sound silly, but it has nothing related to sex. It's nothing related to sex necessarily. It will impact your sex life. However, I want you to start by reducing that mental load that you talked about. We have a lot of invisible labor, mom or not, just that's just what it is. And
Mhm.
reducing that is going to help with your mental fatigue. It's actually gonna make you want to have sex, especially if you're the person that's like, "I want to have sex." Giving yourself more time and space to actually just, like, think or be like a human being is going to get you to the point where you actually wanna have sex, where you actually wanna take these steps. Oftentimes, women end up being like, "Okay, well, I have to address the sex part. The sex part is the problem," but they're still, like, super fatigued, they're not sleeping, they're not drinking water, they're not how my grandma says, "comiendo a sus horas," right? Like, they're not doing any of that, and then they're trying to be like, "Okay, well, maybe if we do this position or maybe if we have more foreplay or, like, all of this," but, like, that is just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. It's not really addressing, like,
Mm.
actually, like, the main root of the problem is the fatigue that you're experiencing. If your body is under a lot of duress, your body's not gonna be like, "Hey, it's a great time to have sex right now." Your body's like, "No, go take a nap. Like, what are you doing?" Right? So, all of that to
Mhm.
say, delegate. Go through this is gonna be tedious, and I'm sorry, but go through literally every single thing that you do. What can you get rid of? Get rid of, like, 3 things. There are 3 things that you do that you don't need to be doing. Don't do them. What can you do worse? Does all of your laundry need to be folded like Marie Kondo style? Like, probably not, right? Like, what can you do worse? And what can you delegate? What can you give to your partner? What can you give to your kids? I see this is yes, ask your partner for help. That is great. But I see this so much. I see this a lot of my sisters as well. Is not that they think that their kids can't do it, but it's almost like I don't want to spend the time teaching my kids or even teaching my partner how to do this thing that I do. But guess what? If you spent a few days teaching them how to do it in the way that you like to do it, or them doing it at all, you wouldn't have to do it anymore. I used to get a really big headache when I would clean the bathroom, and I was like, "Oh, let me just use natural, like, cleaning products instead." Still get a headache. It's just something about the small area, I don't know. I'm claustrophobic, so maybe that's why whatever. Point is, I get a headache. So, I want it cleaned in a specific way, so I tell my partner, "This is how you clean it. These are the products that you use. Please don't use bleach because you're gonna kill me." And now he cleans the bathroom. And it's fine, and we're happy, right? Like, so yes, it was work getting him to do it in the way that I wanted to do it, especially because I didn't want him using specific products, but really teaching your kids, like, a 4-year-old can wash towels, like, if they can reach, right? They can learn to wash dishes. Get some plastic dishes. That's fine. Like, no one's gonna die, right? Really just delegating that. Another this is like my new favorite thing that I've implemented in our household. I don't like being asked questions, especially at the end of my day, which is when my partner comes home. So if it is a question that he can probably find the answer to, I've asked him, like, hey, can you try to figure out the answer on your own first and then come to me? Right? That doesn't mean that he's always gonna do it.
Yeah.
He still asks me questions, but the questions that I know he's gonna ask me, like, I've put labels on the cabinets of this is where stuff is, don't ask where it is, look for it, right? It's labeled on the cabinet. I don't need him to remember, I just need to have a place where the answer is that he can go and find it. I don't like being asked what's for dinner because I don't like thinking about that question myself. So I plan the meals ahead of time. I put it on the calendar and it's on our fridge. So if he wants to know what's for dinner tonight,
Mm,
look at the calendar. I don't need to tell or
mm,
we have a shared calendar. So like I my workday ends different times each day or like today I'm like randomly recording a podcast. That's on the calendar. If he wants to know what time I'm off of work on a specific day or if I'm working at all, then he can go and look himself. And so really about providing it
mm.
is some work up front, but it's really about providing all of what's in our head already to everyone else because we assume that no one else has the information, so we have to do it ourselves. But it's almost like we're gatekeeping the information. And that's not necessary. Like
Yeah.
just share it. And like there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes. Oh, I love this. And I think it is so important, especially as mamas, to just like let things go, and yeah, like the delegation piece is so essential. And putting, just like little tasks on your kids. I think that that is really helpful as well. And I almost think about those like Instagram like reels about like, "Oh, I'm training my kid this so that your dusty boyfriend or girlfriend doesn't think that, XYZ." And I
Mhm.
think of that because I think that that sets your kids up for success too. And yeah, so there's so many nuances to this. So really I appreciate you sharing this because at the end of the day, that can impact, your sex drive. So thank you for sharing that. Such great tips and advice. Yes. Well, Anna, where can people follow you or work with you, especially with your services? Can you share that to our listeners who haven't yet heard episode 19?
Yeah, of course. Well, first, go and listen to episode 19. But you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Sex and Spanglish. So it's Spanglish, not Spanish. I currently have three offers if you count the consulting. So I run a group coaching program called La Sinvergüenza Symposium. It's a Latinas only group coaching program where we're really deconstructing like the cultural messages. So we talk about like, oh, well, my mom said this growing up, and I don't believe that, and like all of that, all the shame and guilt that comes along with that. And then we're also learning to enjoy sex sin vergüenza. So I help you to get rid of all that shame and guilt you feel, or how my clients phrase it is like, oh, I'm gonna get in trouble. Like if your mom's gonna barge in while you're having sex or something, we know that's not gonna happen, but our bodies are like tensing up and like, ooh, right? Which can lead to pain. So, and low desire. So, anyway, that's what we're doing over there. I also have a new online course. This is new from the last episode, but it's called
Yeah.
Operation Orgasm. So it's a DIY self-paced course. So you just get immediate access to the course and go through it. I literally give you everything that you need to have mind-blowing sex on demand. So consider it like an independent study. But then you also get lifetime access to an online community, so you can go in there, ask questions both anonymously and not if you're brave. You can also get coaching in there. There's opportunities for life coaching as well. So if you're like, I've never joined a coaching program, I don't know what that looks like, this is a great introductory, like a way to introduce yourself to the coaching world. And for my writers out there, I am now a smut consultant. So again, I'm working with authors to write more sex positive sex scenes that don't like bore their readers. Like sex does not have to be boring, even if it's like quote unquote politically correct. Oh, and before I forget, I didn't mention my ebook. I told you I was going to mention my ebook for your listeners. Uh,
Yes.
so my new ebook just dropped last month or last month, this month. I don't know what month we are in, but anyways, just don't get pregnant and other dichos, a Latina's guide to deconstructing cultural messaging and enjoying sex sin vergüenza. So it's just a free download. I'll send you the link so that your listeners can download.
Mhm. Wow, mujer, you're so busy, but so essential, especially within the community, because I don't know of any sex coach out there, besides you. And I love that we're local too. You're in the Midwest as
Yeah.
well. But thank you so much. And I'll make sure to share all of your services and offers on the show notes as well as your social media handles. But Anna, thank you so much for spending time with us. I really appreciate it. And again, normalizing this taboo topic that we were brought up with.
Of course.
Mujer, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to the Viva la Mami podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, will you do me a favor and follow the podcast and leave a rating and review? Hitting that follow button and reviewing my show will allow other mommies like you find this podcast. Your review will also tell me if you enjoy the show, so I would truly appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget, please share this podcast con tus amigas. Also, make sure to follow me at Viva la Mami on Instagram or visit vivalamami.com. Please note the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. Okay, mujer, thank you for joining y nos vemos in the next episode.